I'll try, Vikas. I'm going to keep it at 5 minutes. I have another Zoom call that I got to get to with my students. So I've been on the last two calls as well. I'm going to summarize from a teacher perspective what we're seeing. First of all, this crisis response. Teachers on the front lines that are in professional models, professional standards, high professional standards are doing quite well. You've heard David talk about it earlier in this call, but they've been able to pivot quite quickly. And can you hear me, Vikas?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'm hearing some background. They've been able to do a great job. The ones that have more of an occupational model where it's a pretty scripted teacher that's in the classroom and that the teaching standards are not at the same level and austerity measures have pretty much brought down the teaching profession are struggling at this point. So I'm going to approach it from three different things at the moment. Number one is the crisis response and how teachers were used. Across the board, across the world, teachers were not used as well as we could have been, particularly when school closures happened. Teachers are the ones that have the closest relationships with students, apart from their parents. We could have been used by the healthcare system in terms of communication to be able to practice physical distancing, reaching out to these families, getting that, disseminate that information, getting out that information as quickly as possible, but also making contact with our students very quickly. There's many systems across the world that have centralized that communication and that have told teachers not to communicate with their students right off the bat. And I think that's wrong, right from the start in terms of a social emotional point of view, in terms of being able to send out the message that the population wants to hear and needs to hear from the healthcare perspective. So I think in terms of crisis response, that was a big gap that if we are going to have other shortages over the next, or other school closures over the next 12 months to 18 months, we should really think about teachers as first communicators and first responders in that sense. The second thing is with this crisis, and I think Nadia really touched upon it, is the social programs and the equity issue needs to be addressed, and that's something that cannot be addressed by teachers and education. It can be addressed in partnerships, and teachers can be a part of that conversation, but realistically, the social programs need to be in place to address those basic needs of students. Have not been there. And on the two past calls, that's the same thing. You're looking at basic needs in terms of food, you're looking at basic needs in terms of shelter, child abuse, social programs in terms of maybe welfare and so on and so forth. Where the school plays that hub, we really need to look at it from a different lens. Learning as it happens now, I'm sorry to say, but from what I see, it's going to get to a certain level and teachers are doing the best they can, but without those social programs and without the professional development and capacity building, it's not going to get much better at this point. So we need to look at it from an emergency education's point of view where, okay, what are we going to do when we get back? And let's put our time and effort into that right now. So we've done the response, we're doing as best as we can, but let's allocate a lot of resources to look at what are we going to do when we're coming back? With two main principles. One is, can we build it back better? And can we do no harm? Because realistically, the equity gap is going to be wider when we get back. Students across the board are going to have some sort of gaps that they're dealing with. But as long as we take care of the social, emotional, and relationships, we're doing a good job. So one of those programs that I think should be put into place is what kind of task force are you going to have, particularly in countries that have more of an occupational model to teaching and not a professional teaching standards, to make sure that those students come back. So those are partnerships that need to be created with social workers, with NGOs, with foundations, and you got to be knocking on everybody's door or finding them where they are and making sure that they come back to schools. That's a major issue that we need to be taking a look at the moment. Kuhn talked about blended learning and asynchronous and synchronous learning. I agree with that. And if you're looking at asynchronous, we got to push it to the next level and look at the different types of learning that you can do, because we treat pedagogy as and now we have these all-star pedagogies, but instead it's your toolbox. You use all of these pedagogies at the right time. So you have active-based learning, you got blended learning, you got collaborative and cooperative learning, you got experiential learning, guided discovery learning, inquiry-based, problem-based, project-based learning. And all these learning styles can be put into place in the design for online learning, for asynchronous or synchronous learning in that view. But we can't do that right now. And we have to have the lens of it for long term. So I think what we're seeing in the call today and what we're seeing across the board is, one, we need to have social programs put into place. And we need to really think about how are we going to get that equity gap closed. And then the second thing is building on the teacher capacity and the professional development of teachers to make sure that the professional standards are high so that we can address the issues as we go forward.